Well, here's a question we're going to ask John Stillman today. I'm in my 50s and work as a software engineer. I like my boss, like my coworkers, but my company has undergone a series of layoffs the past couple of years. So far, I've avoided them, but how do I prepare in case my day comes? Let's grab John and answer that question right now. Welcome in. I'm Ben George with John Stillman at Rosewood Wealth Management. John, sometimes we get forced into maybe an early retirement, maybe not in this case because we're in our 50s, but preparing for a layoff. It could happen to you anytime. So let's dive into this, John. Where do you want to start with this question?
Well, I'm glad that this question is being asked before the situation has actually presented itself. Because when you kind of start thinking about these possibilities, then when it lands in your lap, it doesn't feel so stressful. Like Molly and I were talking about this the other day, and when we bought our current house, we looked at the house, we decided, I want this place. And so I was on the phone with our realtor and probably giving her some pretty aggressive numbers in terms of what we were going to do with the offer and due diligence and all that. And Molly's eyes were this big, like, wait, what? But I knew what the numbers were. Right? Like I hadn't decided to buy a house 45 minutes before we went to look at the house. I knew, and I had known for months what we could do and what was realistic. And so same kind of thing in this situation. If you'll understand your numbers before the situation, like I said, lands in your lap, then it doesn't have to be stressful when it happens, because then it's just kind of, let's assess the particulars of the situation when it happens. So the thing you want to be thinking about is, and how old was this person? Did you say
his 50s?
In his 50s. Okay. So in your 50s, more than likely, you're probably not ready to be retired altogether if some kind of layoff happens. So you want to kind of be thinking ahead to, all right, well, what might I want my next step to be? And then you want to understand, does that next step need to be something where I'm making as much as I am now? Or am I okay to maybe step back my stress and also step back my income at the same time? Might that be worth doing? So we have to know where you are in terms of your savings, how much you're going to need to create the lifestyle that you want in retirement. But if we can identify that you're already on a pretty good path, and maybe we don't need you to put a whole lot more into the pot in terms of your retirement savings, we just need you to not lose what you have and not take anything out just yet. If that's the situation, maybe you can afford indeed to step back your income some and be okay. So you want to be thinking about what you want that next step to be. The other thing is kind of this tax planning conversation around, well, what's going to happen with the timing of this layoff if it happens? If it's the kind of thing where you've been at the company for a number of years, you're going to be owed a pretty big severance. Well, it might be a situation where you're better off to get laid off in, let's say, April than in November. Because if you work all the way through November and then you get a severance that might be 6, 8, 12 months of salary, depending on how long you've been at the company. If you work through November and then you get that severance all in the same year, that's a lot of income for that year. That might bump you up a tax bracket or two. So that's kind of out of your control, but they also might give you the option with the severance of taking it over the course of several months instead of just all in one lump sum. That's the kind of thing we might want to assess from a tax planning standpoint. But a lot of times, people dread this layoff and then it happens and then they go find another job that they like more, that pays them comparably. And oh, by the way, you got 6 months worth of severance when you got laid off and you found a new job in 2 months. So it's like you double dipped for 4 months. You were getting paid for 2 places. So a lot of times these layoffs, even though it's kind of unpleasant to go through, can turn out to be a really good thing. That's after you get through it though, right?
Yeah.
It's stressful when you're going through it. And this is where I'm saying, if we can kind of plan for this contingency before it happens, then even the going through it isn't that stressful because you already sort of knew what was going to happen.
Is this something that you have conversations with your clients about no matter what, John? Or is it more of a situation where, okay, new ownership, we've seen some layoffs in the industry or specifically with my large company, then let's talk about it? Or do you still kind of have this conversation, hey, what if this came out of nowhere and impacted you? What's the next step? So what's the conversation look like?
So anytime I have somebody who's working at like a big corporate job, we're kind of always going to have this in the back of our mind. because it is something that happens a lot in corporate world. I mean, we're kind of seeing it now with federal employees, right? They're being offered this buyout, which has never been like a thing that they've had to contend with as federal employees. It's just not something that's ever been on their radar as, hey, this might be something I have to consider, which is why it's stressful for a lot of people. Now, for most of our clients that are in that boat, it's actually a pretty good deal to take the buyout, especially for people that were going to retire in a year or two anyway. If we can get paid for 6 months or 9 months and walk away now, effectively be on administrative leave for that time, that's a pretty good deal. Mm-hmm. But it's stressful because they never considered it as a possibility. In the corporate world, people have to think about this all the time. It's just that federal employees have never gone through it. So yeah, anytime I see somebody in a job where I know this could be a potential thing, especially if they're like 57, they're kind of at that age where the company very well may come along and offer this early retirement buyout. So sometimes it is just a straight layoff. Other times it is an offer of, hey, you can keep working here if you want, but if you'll go away, we'll pay you this amount. And the going away is essentially a severance package, but it might be a little sweeter than the severance you would get if you just got laid off. So yeah, it's something we're always trying to plan ahead for. And I've had a lot of folks who, after we kind of go through the numbers, they're saying, I hope this happens. I hope I get laid off because I know exactly what I would do for my next job. And I know that I could find that job quickly, and I'm not worried about the income gap. I'll actually make money because of the severance. We've had a lot of people in that boat. They end up rooting for this offer to come, either the buyout offer or the layoff. And then when it happens, it's just, okay, let's enact the plan. It's not this, oh my gosh, what do I do now scenario.
Well, for this situation, does much change if we were talking about this person being in their 60s versus the 50s? This is more specifically looking at like retirement and whether that's an actual reality at this point?
Yeah, I mean, if you're in your 60s, there is a decent chance you could just be done working altogether. I mean, maybe you're going to go get a part-time job that pays you $20 an hour doing something, maybe in retail world, or maybe you're going to do a little consulting, something in your field. But once you're closer to Medicare age, you're closer to Social Security age, actually just retiring might be realistic for you, even if it's earlier than you had originally planned on retiring. If the numbers check out, okay, well, it's worth looking at.
Well, if you haven't had that conversation yet with anybody and started kind of mapping out what that might look like post-layoff potentially, you can always get in touch with John, Rosewood Wealth Management, 800-545-2991. Everything else also in the show description as well. Should check that out. Good question, John. Thanks for kind of walking us through that. Got a better understanding of kind of how you proceed in that. And I think it takes a lot of the fear away, the anxiety about that possible layoff happening in the future. So kind of good to know how that looks.
You bet. Talk to you soon.
Carolina Wealth Stewards doing business as Rosewood Wealth Management is a registered investment advisor in the state of North Carolina. The material presented is intended to be general information and should not be construed by any consumer as the rendering of personalized investment advice.